Let's begin this class with a prayer. Heavenly Father, thank you so much for your word spoken to us, but also the land that speaks to us as well. And I pray that we learn new things today and find our story in your story. And I pray these things in Jesus' name. Amen. Okay, so when we did this 2 weeks ago, we talked about the land of the Bible telling the Old Testament. Today I want to talk about the New Testament, and that's going to take us to the Sea of Galilee. But let's begin with the basics first. We talked about this last week. This is a very good topo map if you want to take a screenshot of this with your phone, and we can go back to it at the end if you want to take a picture. It really shows the dramatic dip in the middle of the country, which is called the Jordan Rift Valley, which is part of the Great Rift Valley. It runs from somewhere in Ethiopia all the way up to around Damascus, and it's where two tectonic plates meet. It's Asia and Africa. Another thing that I think I failed to mention, I did give a mention to the biodiversity of Israel, but what I don't think people realize is that 3 continents are represented in a land about the size of Alabama. It's crazy. So that, for instance, the Sea of Galilee, which is here, like the rest of this right here, is in the continent of Africa. So the Sea of Galilee is an African lake. There are African fish, African flora and fauna, but drive 1 hour north up to the foothills of Mount Hermon, and you've got Europe and Asia on either side of the Rift Valley, and you've got brook trout and cherry trees. It's just nuts how biodiverse and the critters that are all represented, if you will, on the continents that are there. And somehow, African jackals or the sort of things, they don't go north into the continent that they don't belong in. I mean, somehow nature just sort of finds its way and knows how to live there. Okay, so that's just an interesting aside. I mean, the Bible didn't tell us anything about that. What you've got in the middle of the Rift Valley is you've got the Jordan River, and it starts here at the foothill of Mount Hermon, which is about a 10,000-foot mountain, and it's significant. It has snow on it right now. It'll have snow on the top of it probably well into the spring, and it's actually, you can ski it in the wintertime. It's a significant mountain, and so inside the mountain you get snow melt and different springs and that sort of thing, aquifers, so that the river flows from the base of the mountain. And the tribe that lived there, and the town that's there at the foothill of the mountain, is the tribe of Dan, the town of Dan. And so the river Jordan means Jordan, from Dan. This is where the river comes from. And it flows south through this swampy area here, which acts like a filter. It's also a flyway for birds traveling from Europe to Africa. Then it flows through the Sea of Galilee, which we're going to talk about this morning, down to the Dead Sea. Now, when I was a little boy in Mr. Hill's Sunday school class at First Baptist, he taught me that the Dead Sea was dead because it didn't flow anymore, that's where the river stopped. Did y'all ever hear that growing up? That was kind of that the Sea of Galilee was a living lake because the Jordan flowed through it, and then the Dead Sea was dead because it stopped. That's technically not true. The Dead Sea is a piece of the Mediterranean that was separated by an earthquake, eons and eons and eons ago. So it's just a body of water that separated, and it has such a high salinity. And I don't know the numbers on that, but some of you've been there. You can just sit on the top of it. It's like that. It's like the Great Salt Lake. That it completely overwhelms whatever fresh water's flowing into it. There's also a sort of a biocatastrophe happening as the Dead Sea is vanishing. It could be gone. It could be gone in the next decade or so as we know it, partially because it's been carved up for industrial salts and people have abused it in that way, and part of it is just climate-related issues. And so Israel's working towards replenishing the Dead Sea, and they've got some sort of conservation efforts going on there to make sure that we don't lose it. So that's kind of the story as I understand it with the Jordan Rift Valley. But what I want to do is take our attention. Last week we talked about how the land tells the story of the Old Testament down here. I want to go up to the world of Jesus for a minute and see if we can see this in a new way. Okay, it's not turning. So give me 1 second. Image. Okay, the Sea of Galilee is just a lake. The Sea of Galilee is a lake because in a world with very little water, The Hebrew word, they don't have a Hebrew word for lake. They don't have a Hebrew word for sea. You either have no water or a sea. So this Sea of Galilee is a freshwater lake, and it is 7 miles across. Thank you, Henry. I need an iPad or something to change. 7 miles across and 11 miles long. So there you go. You can always see across it. Now, what the Bible doesn't tell us is that the Sea of Galilee is the lowest lake on planet Earth because it's in the Jordan Rift Valley. So that means that it's about 800 feet or so below sea level, which means that all of the shore of the Sea of Galilee is a bank, it's a high mountain. So that the Sermon on the Mount, which is my lesson for next week's sermon, is not actually preached upon a mountain, but rather on the bank of the lake. So the Sermon on the Mount happened about right here on a high place. So it is a mountain, but it's also the bank of the lake. The Bible doesn't say this, but what's interesting is that half the Gospels, at least half the Gospels, half the stories that we have take place in a 10-mile arc east to west, or west to east in this case, west to east, west Magdala right here, all the way to Bethsaida, which is right on the other side of the Jordan River as it flows in. I mean, all these stories happen in this remarkably small area. So why do you want to go there? Well, you'll begin to have an understanding of the impact of Jesus on the world when you see how that everybody knew everybody's name. There is a column in the town of Capernaum with the Zebedee name on it, even though it's after the time of Christ. What you learn is that the Zebedees were people who lived in Capernaum, kind of like the Websters, live in Birmingham and continue on. So these are real people with real family ties, with real living memory, with oral traditions, if you will. So when you learn how small the area really is, I think it can really impact how you understand, thank you, Henry, how you understand the Gospels. It's perfect. This is a picture that I took last week, and this kind of reveals the mountain. I'm actually looking at let's use this room as the Sea of Galilee, okay? This is the eastern shore. This is the western shore. This is the corner. This is where the Sermon on the Mount was printed. I was under the clock when I took this picture. So you can see in the mist there, that looks like a mountain. That's just the bank of the lake, and that's where the Sermon on the Mount would have been preached. Now, what's neat about this, and I showed you this last week, if this is the corner here where the Sermon on the Mount was preached, and then the sun would go from east to west and would set, this mountain, so the clock is also a mountain, had a Greek trading city on the top of it named Hippos. I'll show you some pictures today that was plastered white. And so Jesus preaching the Sermon on the Mount right here would say a city on a hill can't be hid because the sun would make it glow, right? So he would use images that he could see even today. This is why you want to go there, because the Bible, not only does the Bible tell a story, but the Bible comes to life. The land tells a story, but the Bible comes to life. So let me show you Capernaum for a second. So Capernaum is over here in the corner. Now, the building material here, let's talk like an archaeologist for a second. The building material here is basalt. What you have there, it's a very seismic area, a lot of earthquakes, and of course it was formed by a volcano. So you get these black rocks that are just everywhere. And so how they would build their cities, and basalt is really hard to work with. It's not soft like limestone, so you can't really carve it into squares or chip it or anything. It's very, very hard rock. So they would just basically pile rocks and glue it together with mortar. It's a very primitive building technique, but this is what the land of Jesus would look like. Now, a couple of thoughts about this. One, I have a thoughtful friend who says that Jesus, if you want to look at the land telling a Bible, Jesus did great on black rocks. Black rock is the rock around the Sea of Galilee. Yellow rock is the predominant rock everywhere else. But when Jesus is on black rock, he's great. I mean, the crowds follow him everywhere. He's miracles, teachings. I mean, he's loved. He can't get a moment's peace. He goes to yellow rock, which is away from home, and then things become more threatening. They reject him in Nazareth, that's yellow rock. Jerusalem is dangerous, that's yellow rock. So when you look at the black rock, I want you to think of home for Jesus. They call Capernaum the hometown of Jesus. Even though he grew up in Nazareth, he spent 3 years in this little place on the black rock. However, let's look at this in the way that I like to, which is with an eye towards archaeology. There's this big white thing right here that's in the middle, and I've got a better picture of it. It's this thing right here. It sits in the middle of the little. Do you notice how Capernaum looks now with all the little black rock? This is made of limestone and marble, and it sits in the middle, and it's called the synagogue of Capernaum. Now, there are 3 possibilities, or there are 3 stories that you'll get when you go to Israel and you go to Capernaum, and it depends on your guide. who's taking you there. But if you were to go with a particularly unthoughtful, uncritical guide, this guide would tell you that this is the synagogue where Jesus healed a man with a demon in his mind in Mark chapter 1. He arrives in Capernaum, and there's a demoniac in the synagogue on a Sabbath morning, and Jesus exorcised the demon. That it happened here. That's really not possible because this building dates to the 4th century. So what will happen then, so this building was built in the 300s. So then the second interpretation that you'll get, which is probably the predominant interpretation, is that this is the 4th century synagogue of Capernaum. That's simply there, that it's over the one where Jesus healed the man with the demon in his mind. It sits over. However, that's a little bit of a problem. Now, I'm going to get us kind of coached up into thinking critically and sleuthing a little bit when we look at rocks. Let's look at Capernaum for a second again. As a village. This is very, very poor technology, and these are very, very poor people, which is to say that the people living in Capernaum in the year 30 A.D. didn't have 2 shekels to rub together. Well, the people living in Capernaum in 330 A.D., they didn't have 2 shekels to rub together either. And this rock that this particular structure is made of is not native to the land. Now you all know, we all live in a world where Amazon delivers everything, and oftentimes the cost is in the shipping, right? What does it cost to ship something heavy? I mean, if you want to buy a Peloton and have it shipped to your house, you're going to pay something because that thing is heavy as opposed to a bottle of shampoo. What do you think these rocks cost to ship in, right? I mean, just the shipping cost alone. The structure is beautiful and Roman. It's precision cut in a world where they were quite content to live in a house made of little black rocks all glued together with mortar. You've got this thing here. It also doesn't look like a synagogue from their world. It doesn't have a bema facing Jerusalem. It doesn't have the sort of the shape or the way that it works. It looks like a Roman building. Well, the third interpretation, which is the one that my archaeology friends, leading with Edon and others, what we'll tell you is that this is an evidence of late Roman tourism. So what would happen is that once Christianity began to be spread in the Roman Empire, thanks to people like St. Paul, and then with Emperor Constantine tolerating religion and eventually making Christianity the religion to glue them all together, people wanted to travel and see this great site, right? See this place, this land of the Bible, this place where Jesus performed all these miracles, the land of the Gospels, if you will. And these Romans, wealthy Romans, came down here and they just saw a pile of black rocks. They just saw a pile of rocks, and to put it bluntly, I think it embarrassed them. It didn't look familiar. One of the things, if you've been to a Roman place, and I know many of us have traveled, you've been to any Roman place, you've been to them all. I mean, Romans like things the same. It's like Romans are like Applebee's. They want the same thing, whether they're in Fort Wayne or Birmingham. You want the same blooming onion, the same, all you can, eat, whatever. And so Romans like it the same. And so what they did is they built something that they could recognize, and it's over the original synagogue. But it's a good lesson in the scandal of the gospel. Does the gospel ever pinch in our world? Are we ever a little embarrassed by our own failure to maybe the gap between God's dream and our life, or does God favor the poor in a way that pinches a little for those of us who are ultra resourced? I'm just saying it's a good story, right? It's a good reminder of what God does, what we do. Now that would have been it until 2009. When they did find a synagogue in Magdala. So if this room is the Sea of Galilee, Magdala is way over here in the corner. So Capernaum is kind of right here near the Sermon on the Mount. Magdala is sort of the beginning of what they call the Holy Ark, where the stories of the Bible happen. Now this is a cool picture because you're looking at a place where Jesus sat and he prayed and he taught. Okay, he could have preached there. Magdala is fascinating. Fortunately, I got to be one of the first sort of lay people to get to see this thing as it came up out of the rocks. Today, it has a really high-end Catholic hotel and resort spa adjacent to it, and you can actually see this through a glass wall at the omelet bar, which kind of takes the mystery out of it a little bit. But it is really, really well done. However, what's cool about it, though, you can walk out there by yourself and kind of squint and kind of ignore all all the luxury around you, and you can see, some of you've been there, you can see where he prayed and where he sat. So this is in Magdala, where Mary Magdalene was from. This is where she got her name. She's from this place. And then that would have been it, except for something really cool that happened just 5 years ago. Just 5 years ago, it happened over the COVID winter. No one's seen this thing. Very few people even know this exists. But about 200 yards from this synagogue, they found another. And I had to see last week if it was still there. Now, when I saw it 5 years ago, I saw it about when they found it. I was told that they were going to cover it up with a roundabout. They're under road construction. They found another synagogue. Instead, what they've done is they've decided to avoid it. So it's sitting out on the side of the road. They did not build the road over it. And so now you're looking at another synagogue. Now this kind of blew everybody away. So think about this. Forever, we've only had the fake one in Capernaum that's not where Jesus was. And then in 2009, they find one, and then 5 years ago, they find another one, and this is not a very, very big place. So why is there another synagogue in Magdala? And again, if you want to take a picture of any of this, you're certainly welcome to. Dr. Michael Eisenberg, the University of Haifa, has two theories. Now remember, this is a theory from a Jewish person, not a Christian evangelical, but this has an exciting story. He believes this is a church split. Wow. Okay. There's an old Baptist joke. I've loved this one about the guy on a desert island. He's got three structures on the island, and he said, "This is where I live. This is my home." And then in the second one, "This is my church," and then "This is where I used to go to church." Right. And so he thinks this is a church split. Now the reason why he thinks this is because this synagogue is less adorned. The one in Magdala has paint and plaster and mosaics, and this one is very simple, and it does have some evidence that it was plastered white. The seats were plastered white, but no mosaics, not much there, bare bones, which means that it could be the synagogue for the poor people of Magdala, where the other one was the rich folks' church. Now, if that's the case, which synagogue do you think he's going to go to? Which one is Jesus going to go to? He's going to go where the poor folks are. Here's another picture of it, of the seat. I mean, he could have sat there in the bench. And you saw this before. So this is how it looks if it's all cleaned up and pretty, the square. So this is it coming up out of the ground in its aboriginal form, if you will. Okay, if this is the synagogue for the poor people, sure, why not? But there's another possibility, and it's from Scripture. And if you've got a Bible in your lap, I want you to turn to Mark chapter 2 on page 813. So page 813, Mark chapter 2, and it's the 13th verse. I want to read this story to you. Now, we're starting to get coached up, right? Everything's close. Jesus appears. I want you to imagine, if you will, a country church. We all know where they are. I'm thinking of one right now, a country church on the way to Lake Martin, just a little brick thing out in the boonies. You know, the pastor there is probably a farmer. You know, it's just sort of local yokels. Same thing with Capernaum, Magdala. These are places where kind of locals were preaching. I can imagine the preaching wasn't very good. And then suddenly Billy Graham arrives, right? And everybody's talking about it. Billy Graham, who can perform miracles. That kind of right, the land kind of tells that story when you go there. And so here he calls a remarkable. Corey has a really good sermon this morning. It's a sweet sermon about Jesus calling kind of not the rock stars around him, but sort of ordinary people. And there's a scandal to this one. Mark chapter 2, verse 13. Jesus went out again beside the sea. We know it's not a sea now, right? And the whole crowd gathered around him, and he taught them. And as he was walking along, he saw Levi, son of Alphaeus, sitting at the tax booth. And he said to him, "Follow me." And he got up and followed him. And as he sat at dinner in Levi's house, many tax collectors and sinners were also sitting with Jesus and his disciples, for there were many who followed him. And when the scribes of the Pharisees saw that he was eating with sinners and tax collectors, they said to his disciples, "Why does he eat with tax collectors and sinners?" And when Jesus heard this, he said to them, "Those who are well have no need of a physician, but those who are sick I've come to call not the righteous, but sinners." For my money, I don't think this is a synagogue for the poor people. I think this is the earliest manifestation of the spread of the gospel. I think that they built this to follow the teachings of Jesus. I think there's a good possibility that they built this so that Levi would have a place to go to church. Tax collectors were forbidden from sort of fellowship. They were excluded from the fellowship of the faithful to the point that perhaps this is a safe place for outcasts now to worship. Perhaps this is a safe place for people who are now following the teachings of the Galilean who taught them at the Sermon on the Mount. Maybe this is a response to the Sermon on the Mount. I mean, there are all kinds of possibilities, but you may be looking at the earliest spread of the gospel right here beside the road on the Sea of Galilee. You see the car going right there? I mean, it's just sitting right there by the road. Nobody knows what it is. The whole world's just going by. I do remember that the road engineer who found it called the hotel across the street, and they said, we found another synagogue, and the director of the hotel said, I don't care, we've already got one. Interesting. So I thought maybe St. Luke's could buy this and open our own luxury hotel, right? And even have a better gift shop. Okay. So let's go to what we call the other side. In Mark chapter 5, we learn this story. This is really one of my favorite places on the Sea of Galilee. If this room is the Sea of Galilee, or I'll use our map now that I've got the iPad. So we've been looking at stories. So the synagogue that I just showed you is over here, and Capernaum is about right here, Sermon on the Mount right here. Now we're over here on this side of the lake, the other side. And it's a place called Kursi, Kursi. And if you were to Wikipedia this, they would tell you that this is a 5th century Roman church. Now, in the field of archaeology, in the Holy Land, many times, if not every time, you will find a church on a holy site, because late Romans, as I mentioned from the synagogue in Capernaum, were spending money. They were Christian now. We use the word Byzantine. They wouldn't know what that word means. That's our word that we use for them. They just saw themselves as Roman people. But the Byzantines loved to build a church, to have a place to go and worship at a site that they knew about in the Bible. And so I want to recap for you what happens here at where this church commemorates. So Mark chapter 5, Jesus goes to the other side of the lake. So he's over there by the clock, beneath the city on a hill that can't be hid, and he lands his boat in a graveyard. And there's a man living in the tombs. You remember this story now? He's howling and bruising himself. He's scary. It's a scary show. Unclean, unclean, unclean. Dead things, dead people, people living around dead people. All this is unclean for Jews, to the point where this is a place to avoid, and then especially a guy that would live there, right? So Jesus ask him, or actually the demons kind of shout out to him that are in his mind, because they know who he is. And Jesus says, what is your name? He says, my name is Legion. And then the demons ask to be cast out into a herd of pigs. Remember the story now? He cast the demons out into the pigs, and the pigs rush headlong into the sea. And so this church commemorates this event. Now, I have a friend who's the caretaker of this park. And it's pretty remarkable what happened here. Let me see if this is the picture I want you to see. Yes. So this is a barracks along the wall of the city that sits on a hill that can't be hid. His city is called Hippos. And what they did here is this is high above the graveyard. You can see the Sea of Galilee down below. I just took this last week. What they did is they used retired Roman legionnaires to work as a police force for this Greek trading city. It's one of the cities of a place called the Decapolis. That's another Bible word that you've heard before. There were 10 sort of Greek independent cities that would trade in tax caravans and that sort of thing. But you needed to protect your stuff, so they would use retired Roman soldiers, and they lived there along the walls of that barracks as a sentry. But they also had a gymnasium there, and had a place to sleep there, and had all this stuff. So my friend Nisim wonders if the man in the tomb, the scary man in the tombs, perhaps was not a Roman soldier with PTSD, because he said the name of the demon was Legion, right? It was Legion. And so it doesn't change the trajectory of the story, but it does give a little bit of local color. Now, what Jesus says to the guy is, go and tell your friends what God has done for you. Remember that? Go and tell. So I failed to put this in here, but there's a courtyard very near this barracks here, and it's just an empty courtyard. It would be the public place for the city. But this too is the earliest manifestation of the spread of the gospel. Now, on this side of the lake, we'll go back to this for a second. On this side of the lake, Jesus will perform a miracle and say, don't tell anybody. He'll heal somebody of leprosy. Go show yourself to the priest. Don't tell anybody. Of course, the guy, blah, 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 blah. But he tells everybody. You know, yeah, you're not going to believe what Jesus did for me. And so the point, Jesus can't go anywhere without being hounded in public. Why does Jesus tell everybody on this side of the lake, don't tell anybody? Because they have the wrong idea. They want him to be a general or a king or something to throw the Romans out of their land. And who better to do it than a general who can feed 5,000 people with just a few crumbs, right? Or raise somebody from the dead. Do that kind of stuff, would have superpowers. So he knows this, and so don't tell anybody. But over here on this side of the lake, poor scary guy down in the tombs, he's suddenly healed. He says, go tell your neighbors and your friends what God has done for you. So that, gosh, if you keep reading Mark's gospel, 3 chapters later, there are 2 feedings in Mark's gospel. There's the feeding of the 5,000, which happened where the Sermon on the Mount happens. They're all hungry, and he feeds them. But then there's a feeding of 4,000 on the lake on this side, and it happens up here somewhere on this side of the lake. So in Mark's gospel, there's the feeding of the 5,000 on the Jewish side of the lake, and the feeding of the 4,000 on the Gentile side of the lake, which means that the man in the tombs is the best salesman that the Bible never talks about. That guy needs a stained glass window, right? Although I had a new learning while I was there last week. So the church, if you were to Wikipedia this, they would say that this is a 5th century, meaning built in the 400s, Roman church. Nissim questions that. There was a theologian, some of you who kind of read up on these things, one of the early, they call them the patristic theologians, a guy named Origen of Alexandria. Anybody read any Origen of Alexandria? It sounds like orange, right? Yeah, I know. You hadn't read it, have you? Origen of Alexandria. Well, Origen of Alexandria moved to Caesarea Maritima, and one of the things that Origen of Alexandria would teach, and this is around the year 250, is that Christians should make pilgrimage to the Holy Land. He was one of the first to do it. And one of the first things that he did was he went to Kursi to find where this miracle happened so that he could document it and they could build a church. He also listed Kursi as one of the major pilgrimage sites in this part of the world. Now, here's where a little sleuthing can happen. I will tell you that when we go back to Israel, we're going to spend most of our time over here. And we're going to be so tired of buses full of South Korean pilgrims and Filipinos that we're going to have to go to Kursi to be quiet because nobody goes over here. It's a quiet little church. I mean, it looks like this when you walk up. It's all quiet in the trees and the shade, and we can tell this story and we can be quiet. However, Origen of Alexandria in the mid-3rd century, not the 5th century, not the 4th century, but the 3rd century, said this place needs a church. People need to go there. So what Nissim showed me is they've continued to uncover things, and this tile is very old. Byzantine tile is typically larger than this. This is very small. This is 3rd century tile. He also has evidence that this building suffered from an earthquake in 368, which means that it's not a 5th century church. It's really a 3rd century church. And you're saying, well, Rich, why am I supposed to care about that? Well, we care about this because, and can you see the pig that kind of came up out of the mosaic there? There's a pig. There's a line of them kind of running down the hill. Nissim thinks that Jesus was here a lot more than the Gospels record. Now, remember, the Gospels are not newspaper reporting. They are artful retellings. They're taking information that they have from eyewitness sources. They're written far after the event. But there are a couple things that point. One, why did Origen of Alexandria think that this was so important? I mean, even today we go, and nobody goes to see the miracle of the pigs. Tourists don't go there today. Why was it so important that he would highlight this in the mid-250s? Well, the lake is deepest on this side of the lake, which means, okay, it's 150 feet deep over here. It's shallow over here. Everybody lives over here because this is where the fish are when it's warm. There's grass. So the fish that they eat is a native African tilapia. A little more robust than the frozen tilapia at Publix, okay? That comes from the Black Belt of Alabama. But it's a tasty fish that eats algae. However, when the water gets cold, they go deep. This side of the lake, so this is very shallow. This side of the lake is deep. It's 150 feet deep, and this is where sardines are. You got to fish for something in the winter. You got to stay alive somehow. And so Nissim is wondering if Jesus and his pals didn't spend a lot more time on the far side of the lake in the winter months with the catch that they could survive on, if you will, which would also lend credence to the feeding of the 4,000 on that side of the lake. Kind of fun, right? It's just kind of neat to be there. And I will tell you that I feel Jesus at the Sea of Galilee. I feel his presence. I feel him. It's a rejuvenating experience to see the water that he loved and to see the land that he loved, and to consider that this too is the earliest manifestation of the gospel. Okay, now why did Rich go to Israel last week? To see this. So let's go back to our map for just a second, our Google Earth. The Holy Ark goes from Magdala in the west to Bethsaida in the east. This is kind of the farthest that you go, right over the Sea of Galilee. For some of you who've been to the Holy Land, you've either been to Bethsaida or you've seen a sign for Bethsaida, but you hadn't really been to the one that Jesus knew. Up until the last 2 or 3 years, you had a Bethsaida that was older than the time of Christ. You had a Bethsaida that was younger than the time of Christ. And so we were all kind of scattered around, just kind of wondering where Bethsaida would be. Bethsaida is the hometown of St. Peter. Now, in Capernaum, there is a house of St. Peter that locals have venerated as a church, and it has a big, huge modern Roman Catholic church over the top of it, and it kind of messes up the view a little bit. But that's the place where Jesus healed Simon's mother-in-law of a fever and was sort of the base of operations for Jesus. We do know where that house would be located, but the childhood home of St. Peter was found. And so it's in the mud by the lake, kind of where the Bible says that it is. And this is current archaeology that's going on right now. That they're just kind of digging it up and slowly uncovering. It's not a park yet. You got to walk about a mile across a pasture into it. But what you have is another late Roman church. Now, this particular church. So one day it'll look like this. Okay, it'll look like a Byzantine church. They'll recreate some arches and columns. But what makes this one different is that it's cattywampus. These churches always face east. This one doesn't quite face east. It kind of faces kind of crooked because it's built over something. We think it's built over St. Peter's childhood home. So this is called the apse, which we kind of do this too at St. Luke's. The sanctuary is not where people sit. The sanctuary is the area of the altar, behind the altar rail. And so this is the area behind the altar rail, and it's sort of arched in the back, which is common in the world. And so what you have here is you've got square Roman stones over first century structure. You remember me telling you about the rocks that they just sort of glued together with mortar? In other words, this is a basalt structure, a first century structure that they think that this church was to commemorate where St. Beter grew up. So that's the change. Also behind the altar is a cistern that they think, and it's just right behind. So the altar's like right here, and then here's the back. We think it's a baptistry. So not only could you take communion over the house of St. Peter, you could also be baptized over the house of St. Peter. The church indicates that people running off of oral memory, okay, just talking about it in the Galilee, somebody knowing this family would say that this is the house of St. Peter. Yep, and that's why I went for that money shot right there. I'm sitting on the house of St. Peter. I think what I've shown you today are evidences, earliest evidences of what people were doing with the story of Jesus. What were they doing with it? Well, they were venerating it, of course. They were remembering it. They were taking the stories now internally back to wherever they were from. You're beginning to see how this land was beginning to change their lives, if you will. And my hope is that this land will change ours as well. I'm going to go back to leave it on this one if anybody wants to take a picture. I'm going to turn this off, see if y'all have any questions. I got just a minute.